Okay. So there's a lot of things going on here.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things going on.
I need to know about DOGE. What happened? You're on this podcast. You give us this beautiful soliloquy about the managerial class. We're moved. And it was so important that I was like, I need you to break it down dumb. Obviously, you're a very smart guy. So I was like, you guys
say that, break it down dumb, but I know you're into the center of it. I remember that conversation.
6th grade.
I'm a moron.
We're 6th graders.
I'll tell you, if you can't explain it to a 6th grader, it means you don't understand it yourself.
That's what Epstein said.
Quick, y'all.
Okay.
Get ready. Okay, so...
I see you just deliver this amazing thing. It's crazy on Twitter. Everybody's like, you got it.
Then after we met, where one of the core chapters was about dismantling the administrative state. So this is my passion.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All of a sudden, Trump announces that you and Elon are running DOGE.
Yes.
I'm so excited.
I'm like, finally, this is going to happen. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you say you hate American workers or something. And
come on. I didn't say that. No. He said they were too dumb. None of the above. But we need to light a fire under. We can talk a lot about
we're going to talk about
light
that.
a fire under our feet.
No, we're going to talk about that in a second. But no. So what happened? And now you're leaving DOGE on the precipice of actually cleaning up the government, getting the managerial class out of there, fixing everything.
We got a good head start, by the way, in the 2 months leading up to inauguration.
Yeah.
But I'll give you the high level. There's a short story and long story. I can give you the short story for sure. And the short story, both are accurate, but the short story I can give you. The short story is it evolved from a focus on where I was focused, legal, constitutional issues, legislative issues of, if you want to save a lot of money, you got to do it through legislation. If you want to look at the Supreme Court landscape for the last few years, it says a lot of these regulations are unconstitutional. That's where I had been focused. And, the way it's gotten started, and you could see this publicly as well, is much more of a technology and digital technology focus.
Okay, so just slow down for a second.
Yeah.
So you were going to use the Constitution to remove legislation.
Well, to remove regulations.
Sorry, regulations.
Yeah.
So you're going to use legislation to remove regulations.
And I've written about this for the last year, right? So
can you give an example of that?
Yeah, I can give a good example of that. So, not to get too academic too quickly, but basically, Congress is supposed to pass the laws, and the executive branch is supposed to enforce the laws. But it turns out that most of the laws that decide what you can and can't do in your life were actually never passed by Congress. They were passed by people who were never elected to their position.
The managerial class.
The bureaucrats in D.C.
What's a law? Give me an example.
Yeah, so they don't call laws, they call them rules, but they have the effect of laws.
Right.
Let's say the amount of fees that fishermen have to pay to the government to have a license to be able to fish in a particular area. Let's say it is the registration requirement before a bank or an asset manager is allowed to do business. Let's say it is the procedural hoop that a biotech company has to jump through before advancing from phase 1 to phase 2 of the development process. Let's say it's the permission that a coal miner or a nuclear energy plant has to get as permission from the government before they build a new nuclear energy plant, which, by the way, has not happened in 20 years in this country because the red tape associated with doing so is so impossible.
Now, I imagine
none of those were passed by Congress.
Yes.
None of those were passed by people that we, the people, elected.
Right.
They were written into law. They call them rules, but effectively into law by unelected bureaucrats.
Right.
And the thing is, that's not a democracy, right? It might be something else, but it's not a democracy. Because in a democracy, if somebody makes a law that affects you, you get to vote them out. That's what it makes a law. These are more like edicts.
Yeah.
Right? Edicts come from a king because you can't vote him out. This doesn't come from a king, but it's a new kind of edict of a bureaucracy.
So just so I can understand,
that was the problem.
You're not against regulation as long as it's decided by democratically elected officials.
That's my most foundational principle. It so happens in my own politics, I'm generally pretty libertarian. I tend to be against, I think most of these regulations tend not to be productive.
But sometimes you need regulation.
But the most important principle is, if you're going to have it, at least let the people who it affects to say, if it's not working out for me, I want to be able to vote you out. Now, I need to be able to vote you out. That's the most important principle.
Just so we can understand, like a lot of this probably comes from good intentions.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So these aren't like evil people necessarily.
There's evil. There's certainly malicious people in all kinds of domains of life.
Yes.
And the government is no exception to that.
Right.
And you can see some egregious examples of it. But by and large, I think what we're talking about the regulatory state. the overwhelming majority of federal bureaucrats who I've met are good people because most people are good people.
Yeah.
And they believe what they're doing is not for the detriment of the American people.
It's for the betterment of the American
But it's for the betterment of the American people. It's a kind of elite benevolence.
Yes.
And it's sort of skeptical of democracy because the idea that you could just leave it to ordinary people to decide this complicated stuff. We can't leave it to ordinary people because they're going to harm themselves.
They're too dumb.
We have to make that. Exactly. And that was the whole premise of the British monarchy. It's kind of the whole premise of the modern federal bureaucracy.
But I get that. I think it's nice to not paint all these people who are creating this, what do you call it? Creating
bureaucracy, red tape, regulation, exactly.
As nefarious. Because that's
I think
not the case.
By and large, most human beings are not nefarious.
And a lot of times it's reactionary. Like I think
most human beings are good people.
Yeah, there was
good intentions.
There was like a fire in New York, I'm pretty sure. And I think one of the rooms was created in like an apartment building. And I think a fireman died because they built the room but didn't ask the city for permission. So the plot or the plan that they had. So then I think what the knee-jerk reaction was to say, you cannot do anything to your apartment without permission for the whole city. I'm probably butchering this.
Yeah, but it's the kind of example you see all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And I get that knee-jerk reaction because you want to protect firemen. These guys are brave. They're running into a fire.
And it's actually a great example because you see that same type of incentive structure show up all the time where someone at the FDA, they rarely will get hauled in front of some hearing if they fail to approve a drug that saves lives. But if they do approve a drug that has some unintended side effects, then they're going to be in the public eye. So their incentive is to go in one direction, not the other. Does that make them an evil person? No. Most human beings just respond to the incentives that they have while still in their heart of hearts believing that they're doing good. That's the way the federal bureaucracy works.
So this is your idea for
DOGE.
It's too
big,
right?
Well, and we laid it out. So there was a Wall Street Journal op-ed that we co-authored soon after it was written, focused on this constitutional approach, where the Supreme Court in the last couple of years came out and said, actually, most of those rules are actually unconstitutional because they didn't go through Congress. That's a big freaking deal. Happened a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So we got that toolkit. And then if you want to really tackle government spending, which is a separate prong, the budget's set in Congress. There's no way around that, right? The budget is set by Congress. If you want to cut trillions of dollars, you got to go to the core of that budgeting process. So that was where my focus and our focus was. I think if you look at, now what's taken off, and I think it could be great, it's very much a digital technology first approach.
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I'll let you read the exexecutive orders that came out last week. And like I said,
we're not doing that.
We got the guy right here.
I know that's it, so I'll be, I'll leave it at what I'm able to say, which is, sort of what you can see publicly. Very technology focused approach, and that there's nobody better to take a technology focused centric approach than Elon. And by the way, we ended up having a pretty open discussion amongst all of us that if my focus is on the legal, constitutional, policy-making functions, that's where my passion has been. The right way for me to realize my own vision is through elected office. And
But by the way, not the governor of Ohio or anything.
All of those except that one position. Announcement will be coming of some kind in the next couple of weeks.
Got it.
But I will say that even some of the regulations you brought up, right? The fireman example.
Yeah.
Most of those regs aren't just federal regulations. In fact, most of them that affect people at everyday lives are also at the level of the state.
Right.
And, I think short of being a president, when you think about driving executive action to improve people's lives, I think a governor's seat is probably the single best way to actually do it.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
And so that's where I land.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Wouldn't you and Elon coming in as DOGE, isn't that the same as unelected bureaucrats coming in to make a bunch of rules?
So I think it's a super fair question. I've fielded that over the couple of months. The question is, it's one thing if you are undoing the actions of people who have actually affirmatively made rules versus making new rules of your own.
So you're not going to make any rules. You're just taking away rules. I think.
Well, I think if you're rolling back rules and actually cutting bureaucratic overgrowth, it's one thing to come in and say you're going to hire 1 million federal bureaucrats without any authorization from Congress to do it. It's another to say there are 4 million, many of whom were hired without that authorization. We need to scale that headcount back. It's another thing to say all these regulations showed up with Congress never authorizing them. It's another to say they're illicit unless they go through Congress, right? So that was the premise. It's a one-way ratchet. If there's been a federal government overgrowth and a lot of that was never authorized by the democratic process, then it's one thing to say, okay, then all of that, in order to comply with the Constitution, has to be rolled back. You can't make it without authorization.
But how would you apply all of these new tech you said Elon's trying to do like tech-driven rules.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let.
Wouldn't that be new rules?
Well, so I shared with you. I shared with you my outlook was in what brought me to the project, and I'm super rooting for success and hopeful for success for what's going to come from a technology-driven approach.
But that's
we had a different philosophy and approach and emphasis.
And talk that shit.
No, it's
talk that shit.
Well,
me and my wife had different philosophies about
the
dinner
truth of the
last
matter is, I think there's
philosophy.
nobody better in the world to run a technology-focused approach to fixing the federal government than Elon. And if that's where the focus is, I'm rooting for their success. And similarly, when I'm thinking about my legal, constitutional, legislative focus in downsizing government, it's hard to argue the best way to do that isn't through actually being elected in my own right.
I'm sorry. I'm having trouble understanding what the technology-driven approach would be. Can you?
What does that mean?
I mean, all I'll say is at that point,
Can you
I'm
give
not
an
running
example,
that. I'm not running
hypothetically,
that.
or whatever?
No, I would say
Because I truly don't know what that means.
I hear you. I think we're probably reaching the outer bounds of what I'm able to talk about. But stay tuned, and I'm rooting for success. It's not mine. I mean, I gave you what my outlook is because I could speak for my outlook.
Yeah.
So before you guys started,
I think there's an opportunity. Is there an opportunity to make things more efficient using digital technology? I believe there is.